Well, I this has been a great event, and a lot of the key issues were surfaced here. What I see going forward is that there are certain technology trends that are sort of inexorable, and that are going to shape the whole environment around new models of finance, new models of how you're able to manage risk, and basically new methods of how things are going to be basically authenticated, and what different parties can absorb risk. And I think that's going to go in a vastly more democratized, distributed way, which I think is one of the really fundamental changes, that institutions of authority and authentication have traditionally been very hierarchical. It's been the state, it's been banks, it's been the church. They all sort of decide what your identity is. They give you an identity credential, and the basis of that, they decide what kind of privileges to accrue that you have. And what's happening now is that you're basically being able to authenticate an identity with big data, various kind of metrics, and it doesn't have to be a single institution or a traditional institution. It could be the algorithm itself, and that's what's so intriguing to me about Bitcoin. I mean, I subscribe to the view that, yeah, Bitcoin is interesting as much as in the protocol and the idea that there exists a independent algorithm out there. If you can, and this is really the ultimate open loop, that basically you apply and you trust the algorithm, you trust the math in order to be able to make exchanges of value. In the identity sphere, one of the things we're looking at is, and done experiments at MIT, is you can data mine the mobile phone, and from that data mining you're able to develop an authenticated, basically, signature of the person, sufficiently rich that you can have something we call TOFU, trust on first use, and that you can start the whole identification process without having to go traditional institutions. So what resides is that algorithm, it's an open source algorithm. You apply against the data set, and people are authenticated. You want data to circulate, you want to have a lot of people add value to it, everyone's dependent upon, but no one party has control over it. And so we're looking at what we call digital institutions that manage common pool resources. And how can you do that in a way in which the governance mechanism is not an externality, it actually is a self-correcting, self-healing process. So there's a lot of technology out there that can be applied to designing different kinds of self-executing, self-enforcing contracts. It's very, very difficult for existing institutions to be as agile as they need to be. It's not even a technology issue, it's a cultural issue. It's a whole mindset. There's a legacy, not just a technology legacy, but an organizational legacy structure that makes it very difficult for the move. So I'm of the mindset that you're going to get new kinds of players going to come in.
I think naturally we follow on. Just a little bit of background. I spent my career with the Economist newspaper. In the last decade, I was the Africa correspondent, and I kind of was writing a lot about technology and the mobile sector in Africa, and followed that whole evolution. Now, when I arrived in Africa 10 years ago, the business model for Safaricom, which is the big player in Kenya, was to have 400,000 users by 2012, and that would have been a great payoff for Vodafone. Actually, as of December, they had 19.5 million users. Just colossal. And of course, as most people know, they launched M-Pesa, mobile money platform. So having seen that whole evolution, actually I think Africa is a place where the impossible is possible, because we have so many young people who are unbanked, haven't made the choice yet. The state doesn't own their data. Facebook is desperately trying to own their data, and Google as well, and I think these companies have done fantastic things in Africa, but I also think they're highly problematic because they're buying a lot of digital real estate and at almost no cost. So to me, there is a huge opportunity there to give young people state-of-the-art solution.
I mean, just to add another thing that in terms of the development model, and then also working with the World Economic Forum on this in the last 3 years, and there's been a lot of there's a council there, and we worked to develop the mindset that people have control over their own personal data, and let's get this vetted, and that there's a sort of Bill of Rights that goes with the control of your personal data. And I think that what you're finding is how we decide these questions and who has that kind of control. You're building new kinds of civil digital institutions, and the fact that it's a non-trivial question is for example, was mentioned earlier, that you and say Nigeria, you have identity cards, and India you've done the same. But problem that's problematic if you have a single identifier and the state controls what it is. You create God's eye views of the data, and you also create God-like powers. There are ways of authenticating people to give it, they have their sovereign rights and control over it. So I think big data analytics is very, very powerful, and it's going to change the nature of advertising and ad networks, because it's not just you're not just getting click-throughs, you're getting buy-throughs, because you know so well what people want.
Yeah, I think, John, following that, I mean, it's really worth emphasizing for the non-techies in the room exactly what we're talking about when we talk about big data in the next decade. We're looking at 100-fold increases. I mean, for example, in the African context, building the square kilometer array in South Africa, which is, a radio telescopy project, and that in itself, within 3 years, will be pushing out more data than the entire planet is presently pushing out. I mean, the colossal uptick that we have. And there are so many things we don't know at the moment, which we will know in 5 or 6 years' time. I mean, I don't know. Kinshasa is the third biggest city in Africa. It might have 9 million people. It might have 13 million people. We will know in 3 years' time, pretty much down to 10,000 people, how many people will actually live in that city. So there's a colossal sort of
it's more in a smart city, but the other thing is recognize the Internet of Things. So you're going to having billions of sensors out there that are collecting data. All right. Well, I'm pretty optimistic actually, and seeing what's happening, and I think that there is a recognized effort that people should have control of their own data. This is recognized in the U.S. laws and the EU. Data Bill of Rights. Not only do you have a right to have control over data, you have a right to get a copy of it. You have a right to make it be mobile, so if you don't like one vendor, you can move it to another vendor. So this is getting some kind of regulatory support. I think it makes sense financially for building a marketplace, because companies want a 360-degree view of data. They don't necessarily want to own it themselves. There's a liability issue there. So if the person is being able to aggregate it and share it and make it better and better over a period of time, you're creating a real asset value for all parties concerned. So you're reducing risk, and you're improving the quality of the service. At the same time, the technology is moving at a speed where you get your $25 smartphone. So all that trajectory is there. What's happening in computing and machine learning is also supporting this. I think that the challenge is partly regulatory in terms of where you're going to have jurisdictions that are going to support the latest advances in technology, because I think there's, at least in the U.S. that I'm familiar with, there's a lot of regulatory capture. In the EU, I think it's difficult, and I've talked to a lot, for them to get their hands around what's going on, and they're not, let's say, so propose that governance through API might be a solution. It's not something that's picked up. But I think you're going to see major changes in fundamental industry sectors being redefined for this in the next 5 years. So it's going to be very exciting.
Well, I'm pretty optimistic, because I'm a naturally optimistic guy, but the stakes are really huge. And sitting here in Canary Wharf, it may not look like it, but the future of the world has really moved south and east, and will continue to move south and east. The ratio of European youth, that's 15 to 24-year-olds, to African youth is going to move from about 2.2 to 1 this year to 4 to 1 by 2025. So demographically, we're going to see an enormous swing towards Africa and towards Asia. Most of these are young people who are just getting online. They have very rudimentary connection with the state. They have no connection with the banking sector. So I think radical innovation in this space, coming from a commons movement, coming from companies like Ubuntu, can really have a huge impact. And what I'd like to see is basically a liquid, mobile device where people are able to move, maybe up to a $3 or $5 limit every day, kind of virtual currency, whether that's open source Zen or a similar virtual currency. I think that would be a very radical solution, and how we have a relationship with the state at the appropriate level. So the state is working for us, and
right.